The signal wasn't supposed to exist. It came from a dead zone, a stretch of space humanity had mapped, cataloged, and quietly forgotten. No stars, no planets, no radiation signatures strong enough to matter. Just silence. The kind of silence astronomers trusted. The kind that made long-range scans easier because nothing ever interrupted them. Until something did. It started as a flicker. A pattern buried inside background noise, caught by a deep space listening array orbiting beyond Pluto. At first, the system flagged it as interference. Cosmic radiation sometimes played tricks like that. But this was too clean, too precise. Within seconds, automated systems rerouted the data to Earth. Within minutes, every major observatory was watching. And within an hour, humanity realized something impossible. The signal was structured, not random, not natural. It repeated in intervals, perfect, deliberate intervals. Mathematical ratios embedded in its frequency. Prime numbers layered over harmonic pulses. A universal language, the kind humanity had always imagined aliens might use. Someone or something was speaking. For the first time in history, humanity wasn't alone, and they had just been called. Deep inside the International Signal Analysis Center, a young analyst named Alara Voss stared at the incoming data, her pulse hammering in her ears. Around her, the room buzzed with rising panic, disguised as excitement. Screens lit up, voices overlapped. Every expert in the room tried to make sense of what they were seeing. But Alara saw it first, a pattern inside the pattern. She isolated the sequence, filtering out the carrier wave. What remained made her breath catch. Coordinates. Not just any coordinates, three-dimensional spatial vectors, mapped in a format eerily similar to humanity's own galactic positioning system. Whoever sent this signal didn't just understand math. They understood space. And they knew how to find someone. "Is this the map?" someone whispered behind her. Alara didn't answer immediately. Her fingers hovered over the console as the implications settled in. If it was a map, then it was pointing somewhere. Or worse, pointing at someone. Hours later, confirmation came. The coordinates led directly to Earth. The room fell silent in a way that no one would ever forget. Not fear. Not yet. Just the heavy, suffocating weight of realization. They weren't just listening anymore. They had been found. The news spread fast, but not to the public. Not at first. Governments locked the information down within minutes. Emergency protocols activated across multiple nations. Satellites shifted. Defense systems quietly moved to higher alert levels. Above all, one question dominated every closed-door meeting across the planet. Do we respond? For decades, humanity had debated this exact scenario. Scientists argued that communication was inevitable, that silence could be seen as hostility, that curiosity was worth the risk. Others warned of the opposite, that announcing humanity's presence could invite something far worse than curiosity. Now, theory had become reality, and a decision had to be made. In the end, it wasn't fear that won. It was hope. And maybe a little arrogance. Because if someone out there had reached out first, then maybe they weren't a threat. Maybe they were explorers, just like humanity had always dreamed of becoming. So humanity did what it had always done best. They answered. The response was crafted carefully. Mathematicians, linguists, and AI systems worked together to build something universal. Something safe. A message built from the same foundation as the original signal. Prime numbers, geometric sequences, fundamental constants of physics. A handshake across the stars. We hear you. We understand. We are here. Alara watched the transmission from the observation deck, her hands clenched tightly together. This was it. The moment history would remember forever, or the moment it would regret. The signal launched from Earth's most powerful array, cutting through space at the speed of light, racing back toward the silent void it had come from. For a long time, nothing happened. Days passed, then weeks. Doubt crept in. Had it even reached them? Was the signal still traveling? Were they waiting? Or had humanity just spoken into an empty universe? Then, 23 days after the response was sent, something answered. The return signal didn't build slowly like the first one. It arrived all at once, slamming into Earth's detection networks with overwhelming clarity. Stronger, closer, and very, very different. Gone were the elegant mathematical greetings. Gone were the careful patterns meant for understanding. This signal was sharp, aggressive, layered with dense, complex structures that didn't feel like communication. They felt like commands. Systems struggled to decode it. AI models failed repeatedly. The signal carried depth far beyond the first message, like a whisper compared to a shout. And buried inside it, a translation finally emerged. Not clean, not perfect, but enough. Enough to understand the tone. Enough to understand the intent. Ilara read the translated fragment on her screen, her stomach dropping as the room around her went completely still. Unidentified civilization, you have breached sovereign signal boundaries. Another line followed. Hostile intent confirmed. And then the final line, the one that would echo through human history for generations to come. Prepare for corrective action. No one spoke. No one moved. Because in that moment, humanity understood something terrifying. They hadn't been invited. They had trespassed. And somewhere, in the vast darkness between stars, something ancient had just decided that humanity was a problem that needed to be erased. Ilara's voice was barely a whisper. We made a mistake. Across the world, alarms began to activate, not loudly, not publicly, but quietly, behind layers of secrecy and command chains. Satellites reoriented. Weapons systems awakened. And for the first time in human history, Earth prepared for war against something it had never seen. If this moment just sent a chill down your spine, don't forget to like and subscribe to HFY Global Tales, because this is only the beginning of a war that will change everything humanity thought it knew about the universe. Far beyond the edge of the solar system, something moved. Not fast, not rushed, just inevitable. And it was coming straight for Earth. The Empire did not panic. It did not debate, hesitate, or question. It judged. Far beyond the mapped edges of human understanding, where ancient stars burned with a cold, unwavering glow, the signal from Earth arrived at its destination, not as a curiosity, not as a greeting, but as a violation. Inside a structure that no human mind could have fully comprehended, the transmission was received, analyzed, and categorized in less than a fraction of a second. The verdict was immediate. Guilty. The civilization that called itself humanity had done something unforgivable, not by intent, but by action. They had responded to a restricted beacon, one that had existed long before their species had learned to harness fire. A beacon not meant to invite, but to warn. A boundary marker, and humanity had crossed it. Within the vast expanse of the Empire, an empire so old that entire star systems had risen and died under its dominion. The response was not emotional. It was procedural, efficient, final. In the Hall of Judgment, where decisions shaped the fate of entire civilizations, towering entities of living crystal and shifting energy observed the translated signal from Earth. They did not speak as humans did. Their thoughts moved in perfect synchronization, flowing through a shared network of consciousness. To them, this was not first contact. This was contamination. Emergent species has demonstrated signal breach capability. Technological maturity, insufficient. Intent, irrelevant. There was no debate over whether humanity meant harm. In the Empire's view, intent did not matter. The act itself, responding to a sovereign beacon, was enough. Because only one type of civilization ever answered those signals. The dangerous kind. Historical precedent indicates 87.3% probability of exponential threat growth. Containment required. Authorization requested. For a moment, if it could even be called a moment, there was silence across the network. Not hesitation, just the processing of inevitability. Then the final decision flowed through every layer of the Empire at once. Authorization granted. Execute corrective action. And just like that, humanity was sentenced. No warning, no negotiation, no attempt at understanding. Because to the Empire, this had already happened before, countless times, and it always ended the same way. The extermination fleet was deployed within seconds. From a shipyard hidden in the gravity well of a collapsed star, vessels began to awaken. Massive constructs of impossible geometry, their surfaces bending light in unnatural ways. These were not ships built for exploration or diplomacy. They were built for one purpose: erasure. At the center of the fleet, a command vessel came online, its core igniting with a cold, blue-white light. It was ancient, older than most civilizations humanity had ever theorized could exist. Its systems did not boot up. They remembered. Coordinates locked. Target confirmed. Trajectory calculated. The fleet did not accelerate in any way human physics would recognize. Space itself seemed to fold, compressing distances, allowing the ships to move not through the void, but around it. And with that, they began their journey to Earth. Back in the Sol system, humanity remained unaware of just how quickly their fate had been decided. But not for long. At first, it was a fluctuation, subtle distortions in deep space sensors positioned at the outer edges of the solar system. The kind of readings that normally got dismissed as calibration errors or gravitational anomalies. But this time, the anomalies didn't go away. They grew. At the Kuiper Belt observation grid, an automated station detected something impossible. A region of space where stars seemed to vanish, not because something blocked them, but because something was bending them. The data streamed back to Earth in real time. Alara Voss was among the first to see it. She had barely slept since the second signal arrived. None of them had. The weight of what they'd unleashed hung over every lab, every command center, every classified meeting room on the planet. So when the alert hit her console, she reacted instantly. And what she saw made her blood run cold. Multiple spatial distortions detected, she whispered, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay calm. This isn't natural. Behind her, analysts scrambled to pull in additional feeds. Military channels opened. Satellites shifted focus. The distortions sharpened, clarified, resolved into shapes. Ships, hundreds of them. No, thousands. And they weren't slowing down. Panic didn't erupt all at once. It spread like a fracture, starting in small, controlled cracks before shattering everything. Emergency broadcasts were prepared, but not yet released. Governments still clung to control, desperate to understand what they were facing before the public saw it. But within the war rooms of Earth's most powerful nations, the truth was already clear. They were not dealing with explorers. They were not dealing with diplomats. They were facing an invasion force. And they were completely unprepared. Military leaders across the globe rushed to coordinate a unified response. Fleets that had never been meant for interstellar combat were mobilized. Experimental weapons, still in prototype stages, were rushed into deployment readiness. Everything humanity had suddenly felt very small. Ilara stood frozen as the incoming fleet's trajectory was projected across the main display. A direct line, no deviation, no hesitation. "They're not scanning us," someone said, their voice barely holding together. "They're not trying to communicate." Another analyst finished the thought. They already decided. Silence followed, because there was nothing left to misunderstand. The Empire wasn't coming to talk. They were coming to end it. Within hours, the first ships crossed into the outer boundaries of the solar system. And that's when humanity made its second mistake. Because instead of waiting, instead of trying to understand, humanity chose to defend itself. A small task force, barely a fraction of what Earth could muster, was dispatched to intercept the incoming fleet. Not to attack, but to establish presence. To show that humanity would not go quietly. A message sent not through signals, but through action. Stand down, or we will resist. The ships moved into position near the orbit of Neptune, forming a fragile line against the vast, approaching darkness. For a brief moment, hope lingered. Maybe this could still be stopped. Maybe the Empire would see reason. Maybe the first human ship vanished. Not exploded, not damaged, just gone. Erased so completely that even the data recording its existence stuttered. as if reality itself had rejected it. The rest of the fleet didn't even have time to react. A wave of light, silent, invisible to the naked eye, swept across them, and in less than a second, every human vessel in the engagement zone ceased to exist. Back on Earth, the live feed cut to static. No distress signals, no survivors, just absence. Ilara stared at the blank screen, her mind refusing to process what she had just witnessed. "That's not a weapon," she whispered. It was something worse. It was correction. And now there was nothing left between Earth and the empire that had come to erase it. The world didn't end with an explosion. It ended with silence. For 8 full seconds after the fleet near Neptune vanished, no one on Earth spoke. Not in command centers. Not in government bunkers. Not in the labs where humanity's brightest minds had gathered. Because nothing made sense. Ships didn't just disappear. Not entire fleets. Not vessels equipped with the most advanced defensive systems humanity had ever built. Even destruction left something behind: debris, radiation, heat, signatures. But this left nothing. It was as if those ships had never existed at all. Ilara Voss sat frozen in her chair, staring at a dead screen that moments ago had shown humanity's first line of defense. Now it showed static. Her hands trembled slightly as she replayed the data logs again and again, searching for something, anything, that explained what had happened. There was no explosion curve, no energy spike, no measurable discharge, just a clean, instantaneous drop to zero. "They didn't destroy them," she said quietly. The room around her was filled with people, but it felt empty, hollow. "They removed them." That word spread quickly. Removed. Because it fit too well. And somehow, that made it worse. Across the planet, the silence shattered. Emergency alerts were no longer contained. They flooded into public channels, breaking through news broadcasts, hijacking networks, overriding everything. For the first time in history, humanity saw undeniable proof. We are not alone, and we are under attack. Panic followed, but not the chaotic kind people had always imagined. There were no immediate riots, no mass hysteria, just fear, cold, paralyzing fear. Because the enemy wasn't just stronger. It was incomprehensible. Military commands escalated to DEFCON levels never before reached. Every available asset was activated. Orbital defenses powered up. Missile networks came online. Experimental weapons, some never tested outside simulations, were prepared for live deployment. Humanity wasn't ready, but it was done waiting. "They're entering Saturn's orbit," a voice called out in Ilara's command center. She looked up, heart pounding. The projection updated in real time. The Empire fleet had not slowed, had not changed formation, had not reacted at all. They moved like a force of nature, inevitable, unstoppable. "They're ignoring everything we're doing," another analyst muttered. Because it was true. Human satellites scanned them, targeted them, tracked them, and the fleet didn't respond. Not because they couldn't, because they didn't care. To the Empire, humanity's entire defensive network wasn't a threat. It was background noise. Ilara swallowed hard, forcing herself to focus. "Any changes in their signal patterns?" she asked. "None," came the reply. "No communication attempts. No response to our transmissions." They had tried everything: mathematics, visual encoding, linguistic models, even surrender protocols. Nothing worked. It was like shouting at a storm and expecting it to listen. Then the first civilian station died. A research platform orbiting Saturn, unarmed, non-military, simply went dark. No warning, no visible attack. Gone. The feed cut mid-transmission, the last frame showing nothing but the cold rings of Saturn, and a faint ripple in space that shouldn't have been there. Ilara felt her chest tighten. They're targeting everything now. Not just military, not just threats. Everything. Humanity wasn't being fought. It was being erased. The realization hit global command at the same time. This wasn't a war in the way humans understood war. There would be no battles, no exchanges, no chance to push back, unless humanity changed the rules. And fast. Within hours, a desperate plan was formed. If conventional weapons couldn't even touch the enemy, then humanity needed to try something unconventional, something reckless, something that might not work, but had to be attempted anyway. The order was given: launch everything. Earth's orbital defenses fired first. Thousands of missiles streaked into space, guided by the best targeting systems humanity had ever built. Railgun platforms followed, accelerating tungsten rods to relativistic speeds. Directed energy weapons, lasers capable of slicing through steel, burned into the void. For the first time, humanity struck back. And for a brief, fragile moment, it looked like it worked. Some of the incoming projectiles hit, or at least they should have. But instead of impact, something else happened. The missiles slowed, not gradually, instantly, as if time itself had wrapped around them, holding them in place. Railgun slugs, moving fast enough to tear through continents, simply stopped, frozen, suspended in empty space. The lasers bent, curved, redirected away from their targets, as though space itself refused to let them connect. Alara's breath caught. "They're not blocking our weapons," she whispered. "They're rewriting the rules around them." And then, the Empire responded, not with anger, not with escalation, just correction. The frozen weapons disappeared, just like the ships before them, erased, as if they had never been fired. And then the fleet continued forward, untouched, unharmed, unchallenged. That was the moment humanity truly understood. They weren't just outmatched. They were irrelevant. Global command fell into chaos, but not from panic, from desperation. "What do we even do?" someone demanded. "How do you fight something like that?" No one had an answer, except someone did. Alara stared at the data, her mind racing faster than it ever had before. Because buried in the chaos, there was a pattern. Small, subtle, but they're consistent, she said suddenly. The room turned toward her. They're not reacting randomly. Every time they erase something, it follows the same sequence, the same delay, the same spatial distortion signature. So, a commander snapped. "So it's not magic," Alara shot back, her voice sharper now. "It's a system, a process." Hope flickered. Tiny, fragile, but real. "If it's a system, it can be studied," she continued. "If it can be studied, it can be predicted. And if it can be predicted," someone else said slowly, "it can be exploited." The room fell silent again. But this time it wasn't fear. It was the first spark of defiance. Humanity had been hit, hard, but it wasn't finished. Not yet. Alara took a shaky breath, staring at the unstoppable fleet now crossing deeper into the solar system. "They think this is over," she murmured. "They think we're just another mistake to erase." Her eyes hardened. "They're wrong." Because humanity had just learned its first lesson of interstellar war. If you can't match your enemy's strength, you outthink it. And somewhere, deep inside systems older than human civilization itself, the Empire had just made its first mistake. They underestimated humanity. Humanity did not sleep. Not anymore. The concept of day and night still existed. Of course, the Earth still turned. The sun still rose. But none of it mattered. Across every continent, in every underground command center and orbital station still operational, the entire species had shifted into something else. Survival mode. The illusion of control was gone. The illusion of safety had been erased along with the fleets near Neptune. What remained was something far more dangerous. Focus. Alara Voss hadn't left her station in nearly 30 hours. Her eyes burned, her voice was raw, and her hands trembled every time she paused long enough to notice them. So she didn't pause, because buried in the Empire's impossible technology was something that shouldn't have been there. Consistency. "Run the sequence again," she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion clawing at her mind. The simulation replayed on the main display. A human missile entered engagement range. A distortion formed. A delay, always the same length. Then, erasure. Not destruction. Not impact. Removal. Again. 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 Every single time, identical. "They're not reacting," Alara whispered. "They're executing." Around her, analysts leaned in closer, watching the data scroll past. For the first time since the war began, there was something to hold onto. A rule. And rules could be broken. They're using a fixed response window, she continued, pulling up overlapping timelines. Whatever system they're using, it takes time to activate. Not much, but enough. A commander frowned. Milliseconds won't save us. No, Ilara said quietly, but they might let us hurt them. That word hung in the air. Hurt. Because, until now, the idea had felt impossible. The Empire wasn't just stronger. It was untouchable. But if there was even a fraction of a second a gap between detection and correction, then maybe, just maybe, humanity could slip something through. The plan that followed was insane, completely untested, and possibly suicidal, which made it perfect. We overwhelm the system, Ilara said, her voice gaining strength as the idea took shape. Not with power, with volume. Explain. They can erase anything we send, she said, but they still process each target individually. That delay, it's small, but it's there. So what happens if we give them more targets than they can process at once? Silence. Then realization. We flood them, someone breathed, with everything. Every missile, every drone, every piece of debris that could be weaponized. Thousands of objects launched simultaneously, not to hit, but to overload, to force the Empire's system to choose. And maybe, just maybe, miss something. The order went out within minutes. Across Earth's remaining orbital platforms, launch systems roared to life. Stockpiles once reserved for long-term defense were emptied in seconds. This wasn't strategy anymore. This was desperation weaponized. Ilara watched from the command center as the largest coordinated launch in human history ignited the skies above Earth. It looked like a storm, a man-made meteor shower, rising instead of falling. Thousands upon thousands of objects, missiles, drones, kinetic rods, even stripped-down satellites, accelerating toward the incoming fleet. For the first time since the war began, humanity wasn't holding back. Targets approaching engagement range, an analyst reported. Ilara's heart pounded. Here we go. The first distortions appeared. Just like before. Precise. Controlled. Efficient. Objects began to vanish. One by one. Then 10 at a time. Then hundreds. The Empire system was working exactly as it always had. Erasing everything. Perfectly. But this time, there was too much. The delays started to stack. Milliseconds stretched into fractions of a second. Fractions became gaps. Tiny. Almost invisible. But real. Look, someone shouted. On the display, a cluster of projectiles slipped through. Not many. Not enough. But some. They reached the fleet. And for the first time, something hit. The impact wasn't dramatic. No explosions. No massive damage. Just a flicker. A ripple across the surface of one of the Empire's ships. But that ripple meant everything. Ilara felt her breath catch. We touched them, she whispered. It was the smallest victory in human history. And the most important, because it proved one thing. They weren't gods. The room erupted, not in celebration, but in something sharper. Determination. They can be hit, a commander said, his voice tight with urgency. That means they can be destroyed. Don't jump ahead, Ilara warned. We barely scratched them. This isn't a win. No, he agreed. But it's a start. The Empire fleet didn't stop, didn't slow, but something had changed. For the first time since entering the solar system, their formation shifted. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough. They noticed, Ilara said. And that, too, mattered. Because, until now, humanity hadn't mattered at all. Far beyond Earth, inside the silent network of the Empire, new data flowed through ancient systems. Unexpected input, unpredicted outcome, an anomaly. For the first time in countless cycles, the probability models adjusted. Not by much, not enough to change the outcome, but enough to register something new. Emergent species demonstrates adaptive response. Threat assessment updated. A pause, longer than any before it. Then, escalation authorized. Back on Earth, No one heard those words, but they felt them, because the fleet changed. The distortions in space grew stronger, more frequent, no longer just defensive. Now, they were reaching forward. Ilara's eyes widened as new readings flooded her screen. They're not waiting anymore. The first wave hit Mars, not the planet itself, but the human colonies orbiting it. Stations, habitats, thousands of people, gone, in an instant. No warning, no chance to react, just erased. The room fell silent again, but this time it didn't last, because something else replaced it. Anger, cold, focused, unyielding. Ilara clenched her fists, her voice shaking, not with fear, but with something far stronger. "They can learn," she said. Her gaze locked onto the display, watching the unstoppable fleet continue its advance toward Earth. So can we. And for the first time since the war began, humanity wasn't just reacting, it was adapting. Mars burned in silence, not with fire, not with explosions, but with absence. Where once there had been stations, spinning habitats filled with families, engineers, scientists, there was now nothing. No wreckage, no signal debris, no final transmissions echoing through space. Just empty orbit. Ilara Voss stared at the data feed, her vision blurring for a moment before she forced herself to focus again. She didn't know anyone on those stations personally, but that didn't matter. They were human, and they were gone. They escalated, a commander said quietly, his voice tight with controlled rage. Ilara nodded. No, they adjusted. That distinction mattered, because escalation meant emotion. Adjustment meant calculation. And that meant the Empire still wasn't angry, still wasn't afraid. It was simply optimizing, which meant humanity had one advantage left: unpredictability. They're learning from us, Ilara continued, her voice gaining strength again. Every move we make, they analyze. They refine. They adapt their response. Then we're already losing, someone muttered. Only if we keep playing by their rules. That was the shift. The realization that would define everything that came next. Humanity could not outgun the Empire, could not outmatch their technology, could not outlast them in a direct confrontation. So they would stop trying. We don't need to beat their system, Ilara said, turning toward the room. We just need to break how they expect us to use it. The plan that followed didn't come from a single mind. It came from thousands. Scientists, coders, engineers, strategists, people who had never worked together before, now united by a single desperate goal. Do something the enemy cannot predict. Patterns had nearly doomed humanity. So now, humanity would become chaos. The first step was deceptively simple. Stop acting like a unified force. Across Earth's command structure, a radical order was issued. Decentralize everything. No more coordinated strikes. No more synchronized launches. Every unit, every station, every ship, every weapons platform would act independently. Random timing, random trajectories, random engagement patterns. To any human strategist, it looked insane. To the Empire's prediction systems, it looked like noise. The second step was far more dangerous. Introduce false targets, Ilara said. Holograms, someone asked. No, she replied. Something better. They would weaponize their own weakness. Using scrap satellites, broken drones, and even chunks of orbital debris, humanity created thousands of ghost signatures, objects designed to mimic real threats. But these weren't just decoys. They were unpredictable. Some moved like missiles. Others drifted aimlessly. Some accelerated suddenly. Others split apart mid-flight. There was no pattern, no logic, no consistency to a system built on prediction. It was chaos, and chaos was hard to process. The third step was the most important. We're not aiming for damage, Ilara said. The room went still. We're aiming for confusion. Because the moment the Empire had to question its own calculations was the moment humanity gained ground. The operation launched without a countdown, without coordination, without warning, all at once, and yet completely unstructured. Thousands of objects flooded space between Earth and the advancing fleet. Not in waves, not in lines, but in a storm of randomness. The Empire's response was immediate. Distortions flared, objects vanished, correction systems activated. But something was different. The delays were no longer consistent, because the system couldn't prioritize. Every target looked equally unpredictable. Every movement broke expected models. And for the first time, the Empire hesitated. "Look at the timing," an analyst shouted. "Their response windows are fluctuating." Elara leaned forward, her heart racing. The data confirmed it. Milliseconds became irregular. Sequences overlapped. The perfect system was stuttering. "They're struggling," she whispered. And then it happened. A cluster of real projectiles, hidden among hundreds of erratic decoys, slipped through the distortion field. Not by chance, by design. They struck the same ship as before. But this time, the ripple didn't fade. It cracked. A visible fracture of light spread across the ship's surface, like glass under pressure. The entire command center froze. "Did we?" someone whispered. The fracture widened. For a brief, impossible moment, the ship flickered, not visually, existentially, as if it wasn't fully there anymore. And then, it broke. Not exploded, not destroyed in any conventional sense, but collapsed inward, its structure unraveling into nothingness. Gone, but not erased, destroyed. The difference was everything. Elara felt her breath leave her in a sharp gasp. We did it. The first enemy vessel had fallen, and with it, the illusion of invincibility. The room erupted, not in cheers, but in something far more powerful. Belief. Because now humanity knew this enemy could bleed. Far beyond Earth, inside the Empire's network, something unprecedented occurred. A loss. Not an anomaly. Not a calculation error. A confirmed destruction. For the first time in ages, the Empire's systems did not immediately respond. They paused. Not out of confusion, but recalibration. Threat level reassessment required. Adaptive behavior exceeds projected models. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, a shift. Priority updated. Target classification revised. Back on Earth, no one heard those words. But Elara felt them anyway, because the fleet changed again. Its formation tightened. Its movements became sharper, more focused. "They're not ignoring us anymore," she said quietly. A commander nodded grimly. "No, they're taking us seriously." And that was both a victory and a warning. Because if humanity had just proven it could hurt the Empire, then the Empire would respond accordingly. Elara stared at the advancing fleet, her expression hardening. "Good," she whispered, because humanity had just reached the most dangerous and most important point in the war. They were no longer irrelevant. They were a threat, and that meant the Empire would stop correcting and start fighting. Earth did not wait to be attacked again. For the first time since the war began, humanity moved first, not in panic, not in desperation, but with intent. Mars had been erased. A line had been crossed. And now, humanity crossed one of its own. "We're taking the fight out there," Elara Voss said, her voice steady as the command chamber fell silent around her. Not defense, not survival, war. The decision spread across Earth faster than any previous order. There were no debates left, no factions arguing caution versus aggression. Everyone understood now. If humanity stayed confined to Earth's orbit, they would die there. So they would leave, and they would strike. The first human interstellar combat fleet wasn't built over years. It was assembled in days. Every ship that could fly was armed. Civilian vessels were stripped down and retrofitted with weapons. Mining ships became kinetic launch platforms. Cargo haulers turned into mobile drone carriers. Nothing was elegant. Nothing was perfect. But everything was ready, because perfection didn't matter anymore. Only action. Elara stood on the observation deck as the fleet gathered above Earth, a scattered, mismatched armada of human ingenuity and desperation. Hundreds of ships, then thousands, each one different, each one unpredictable. And that was the point. "They can't model us if we don't follow a model," she murmured. Behind her, a commander gave the final confirmation. All fleets are green. Jump windows calculated. Targets locked. Ilara took a slow breath. For the first time since the war began, humanity wasn't reacting. It was choosing. Send them. The fleet moved. Not as one, but as many. Ships broke formation immediately, splitting into unpredictable trajectories, accelerating at different intervals, using experimental jump drives that bent space in ways barely understood even by their creators. Humanity wasn't just entering space. They were unleashing chaos into it. The first targets weren't random. They were calculated risks. Outer elements of the Empire fleet. Ships positioned slightly apart from the main formation. Vulnerable, if only for fractions of a second. Perfect. The first engagement happened near the orbit of Jupiter. A small human strike group dropped out of warp space without warning, scattering in different directions the moment they arrived. No formation, no pattern, just movement. The Empire ship responded instantly. Distortions flared, erasing 2 human vessels before they could even complete their entry. Gone. Just like that. But the rest? They didn't hesitate. They adapted mid-flight. Drones launched in erratic spirals. Kinetic rounds fired in overlapping, unpredictable bursts. One ship even vented its entire cargo hold, turning thousands of metallic fragments into a cloud of chaotic projectiles. The system reacted, but it couldn't keep up. Too many variables, too many angles, too much noise. And then, impact. A coordinated, not coordinated. Strike hit the Empire vessel from multiple vectors at once. The distortions flickered, delayed, failed, and the ship cracked. Ilara watched the feed from Earth, her hands clenched as the impossible happened again. The second enemy vessel collapsed in on itself, its structure unraveling under the strain of sustained, unpredictable impact. Destroyed. The room erupted, not in celebration, but in sharp, focused urgency. More fleets are reporting contact. Engagements across multiple vectors. Losses are high, but we're getting through. Because this wasn't a single battle. This was war spreading across the solar system. Human ships engaged the Empire fleet in dozens of simultaneous encounters. Some ended in seconds. Entire human groups erased before they could act. Others lasted just long enough to hurt, long enough to matter. Humanity wasn't winning, not even close. But it wasn't losing instantly anymore. And that changed everything. They're dividing their attention, Ilara said, scanning incoming reports. They have to process each engagement separately now, which means their system is under strain, she finished. The Empire's greatest strength was becoming its weakness, because it had never needed to handle chaos on this scale. Not from something this small, far beyond the battlefield. Within the Empire's vast network, something unprecedented was happening. Not just losses, pressure. The system that had once operated with flawless precision now faced continuous, unpredictable input. Correction sequences overlapped. Priorities conflicted. Processing chains extended beyond optimal thresholds. It was still functioning, still powerful, still deadly, but no longer perfect. Engagement density exceeds projected limits. Adaptive variables increasing. Containment efficiency decreasing. The network paused, not in confusion, but in recognition. This was no longer a standard corrective action. This was resistance. And resistance required something the Empire had not deployed in a very long time. Strategic Command Authorization requested. For the first time since the war began, the Empire wasn't just reacting. It was preparing to fight back. Back near Earth, the cost of humanity's new strategy became painfully clear. Reports flooded in. Entire fleets lost. Ships vanishing mid-attack. Pilots gone without a trace. Every victory came with a price. And the price was high. Ilara stared at the casualty projections, her jaw tightening. "We can't sustain this," a commander said quietly. "No," she agreed. "But we don't have to." He looked at her. "What do you mean?" Ilara turned back to the display, where the Empire fleet, once a single unstoppable force, was now fragmented, engaged across dozens of battle zones. "They expected us to defend," she said. "They expected us to stay close to Earth." Her eyes sharpened. "They didn't expect us to spread them out." Understanding hit instantly. "You're not trying to win these fights," the commander said. "You're positioning them." Alara nodded. "We're shaping the battlefield." Because while humanity bled, the Empire was changing, stretching, dividing, and that made it vulnerable. Not everywhere, not all at once, but somewhere. And somewhere was all humanity needed. Alara exhaled slowly, her voice dropping to a quiet, dangerous tone. "They think this is the war." Her gaze locked onto a new set of coordinates forming on the display, far beyond the immediate battlefield. Deeper, closer to where the fleet had come from. "This isn't the war," she said. "This is the opening move." Because humanity had just done something no one thought possible. They had survived first contact. They had drawn blood. And now, they were about to take the war somewhere the Empire had never expected. Home. The Empire had never known fear. Not in the way lesser species described it. Not as a racing pulse or a tightening chest. Not as panic. Fear, to the Empire, was a concept, something observed, cataloged, and understood from the outside. Until now, the cracks had started small. A ship lost here. A delay there. Insignificant by any historical measure. But the Empire had not endured for ages by ignoring anomalies. It studied them, and what it saw in humanity did not fit. Adaptive response curves exceeding projected limits. Behavioral models unstable. Prediction accuracy declining. Across the vast network that connected the Empire's consciousness, something unfamiliar spread. Not panic, not yet, but uncertainty. Because the numbers no longer aligned. They had encountered resistance before, countless times. Civilizations that fought back, that struggled, that tried to survive. But those civilizations followed patterns. They learned slowly. They adapted within limits. Humanity did not. Humanity changed too fast. They are rewriting engagement logic in real time. They are discarding previous strategies without degradation. They are. The statement paused, because there was no existing classification. Finally, the closest approximation emerged. Unpredictable. And unpredictability was dangerous. Back in the Sol system, humanity felt the shift. It wasn't obvious at first. There was no sudden reversal, no dramatic collapse of the enemy. But something had changed. The Empire fleet no longer moved with the same cold, effortless certainty. Its formations adjusted more frequently. Its responses came faster, but less cleanly. More aggressive, less precise. "They're compensating," Alara Voss said, watching the incoming data streams. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "They're trying to close the gaps we created." A commander crossed his arms. "Is it working?" Alara didn't answer immediately, because the truth was complicated. In some places, yes. On the display, several human fleets vanished in rapid succession, erased before they could execute their chaotic attack patterns. The Empire was adapting, learning, evolving its response, but not fast enough. "Every time they improve," Alara said, "we change again." And that was the difference. The Empire optimized. Humanity improvised. One refined perfection. The other reinvented itself mid-battle. And that gap was growing. A new wave of human strikes launched, not toward the main fleet, but around it. Deeper, more aggressive, smaller, faster units slipping through the fractured edges of the Empire's formation. Not aiming to destroy, aiming to disrupt. Communication relays, processing nodes, anything that looked like it connected the system together. Because Alara had realized something critical. "They're not just ships," she said. "They're part of a network. Meaning if we break the connections," she replied, her voice low. "We don't just damage them. We isolate them." And isolated systems were easier to overwhelm. The next engagement proved it. A human strike group, barely a dozen ships, targeted a cluster of smaller Empire vessels operating on the outer edge of the battlefield. They didn't attack directly. They scattered, launching decoys, splitting trajectories, creating noise. And then, they targeted the space between the ships, not the ships themselves. The links. Distortions flared. The Empire responded. But something went wrong. For the first time since the war began, two Empire ships reacted differently. One erased a target. The other delayed. Out of sync. Just for a moment. But that moment was enough. The human strike slipped through. Impact. Fracture. Collapse. One ship gone. The second tried to compensate. But it was already too late. A second wave hit. Another fracture. Another collapse. Two ships. Destroyed. Alara felt a sharp surge of adrenaline. That's it, she whispered. They're not perfectly synchronized anymore. The realization spread through command like wildfire. The Empire's greatest strength, its unified network, was breaking. Not completely. Not yet. But enough to matter. Far beyond the battlefield. Inside the Empire's core systems, the change was undeniable. Network cohesion degraded. Synchronization variance detected. Error margins increasing. For the first time in recorded cycles, the Empire was not operating as one. And that was unacceptable. Strategic command authorization granted. A new presence entered the network. Not larger, not louder, but deeper, older. A command layer that had remained dormant for ages, now awakening in response to something it had not seen in a very long time. A threat that could not be corrected automatically. A threat that required intent. Engage directive override. Instantly, the fleet changed. Not just in movement, in purpose. Ships began to reposition, not reacting, but anticipating. Targeting patterns shifted. Human strike groups that had once slipped through gaps now found those gaps, closing before they arrived. They're predicting us, a strategist said, tension creeping into his voice. Alara's expression darkened. No, she leaned closer to the data. They're learning us. And that was worse. Because if the Empire adapted fast enough, humanity's advantage would disappear. The next wave of human attacks hit harder, faster, more chaotic than ever before. And still, losses increased. Entire strike groups vanished before completing their runs. Decoys failed more often. Delays shrank. They're catching up, someone said quietly. The room felt colder, heavier, because everyone understood what that meant. If the Empire fully adapted, this war would end. Quickly, Alara closed her eyes for a brief moment, forcing her thoughts into focus. They had pushed the enemy, broken its rhythm, forced it to change. But now, it was changing back. Stronger, smarter, more dangerous. We need to escalate, a commander said. Hit them harder. Bigger strikes, more. No. Alara's voice cut through the room. Sharp, certain. Everyone turned to her. That's exactly what they expect, she said. Her eyes opened, steady and intense. If we escalate the way they understand, we lose. Silence followed. Then, what's the alternative? Alara turned slowly toward the main display, toward the deeper coordinates, toward the place the Empire had come from. Her voice dropped to a quiet, dangerous calm. We stopped fighting the fleet. Confusion rippled through the room. Then what are we fighting? Someone asked. Alara's gaze didn't waver. The source. Understanding hit like a shockwave. You're talking about their command structure, she confirmed. Their core. The thing coordinating all of this. That's suicide, a commander said flatly. We can barely survive against their outer forces, and you want to strike deeper? Alara didn't flinch. Yes, because that was the only move left. They couldn't outlast the Empire, couldn't outfight it head-on, but maybe they could unbalance it, sever the head, and let the body collapse. It won't be a large fleet, she continued. It can't be. We need something small, fast, unpredictable. A strike team, someone said. Alara nodded. One shot. No backup. No second attempt. Just one chance to reach deeper than humanity had ever gone, and hit something the Empire couldn't afford to lose. The room was silent, because everyone understood what this meant. Not just risk, sacrifice, but also possibility. Because for the first time, the Empire wasn't untouchable. It wasn't perfect. And now, it wasn't fearless. Ilara looked at the display one last time, watching the once invincible fleet now fractured, strained, and adapting under pressure. "They're starting to crack," she said softly. Her expression hardened. "Let's see what happens when we break them." They didn't send a fleet. They couldn't. Every available ship was already engaged, scattered across a war that stretched from the orbit of Earth to the outer edges of the solar system. Humanity was holding the line, but barely. So, instead, they sent ghosts. The strike team was small, smaller than any mission that had ever carried the weight of an entire species. 12 ships. That was all. No heavy weapons. No massive payloads. Nothing that would trigger immediate priority targeting from the Empire's increasingly adaptive systems. Just speed. Just unpredictability. Just a single objective. Reach the source. Ilara Voss stood in the command chamber, staring at the 12 signatures preparing for launch. Each one represented more than a ship, more than a crew. They were humanity's last gamble. "Jump windows are unstable," an engineer warned. "We're pushing the drives beyond safe limits." "We don't need safe," Ilara replied quietly. "We need fast." The room fell silent, because everyone understood there would be no return. Not for this mission. The Empire was already learning too quickly, adapting too efficiently. If humanity waited, if they gave the enemy time to fully stabilize, this war would end. And it wouldn't be in humanity's favor. Coordinates locked. A pilot's voice came through the channel. Calm. Steady. Too steady. Ilara felt something tighten in her chest. "Remember," she said, her voice carrying across every open connection. "You are not engaging the fleet. You avoid it at all costs. You don't fight unless there's no other option." A brief pause. Then, "We understand." 12 voices, unified, not by command, but by choice. Ilara swallowed hard, then gave the only order that mattered. "Go." The ships vanished. Not in formation, not in sequence. Each one jumping along a different path, bending space in chaotic arcs that even human systems struggled to predict. To the Empire's sensors, they were noise. At first, the battlefield continued as it had. Human fleets clashing against the Empire's fractured forces, pushing, breaking, adapting, surviving. But beneath that chaos, something slipped through. The strike team emerged far, beyond the primary engagement zones, deeper into space than any human vessel had ever traveled during the war. And what they found wasn't empty. It was organized. Not fleets, not patrols, but something else. Structures. Massive constructs suspended in space, arranged in geometric precision. They didn't move, didn't react immediately, but they pulsed. Faint waves of energy rippling outward, connecting to distant points across the battlefield. Ilara's breath caught as the data streamed in. "That's it," she whispered. "The network core. Not a single ship, not a command vessel, but a system. A living architecture of control. Every distortion, every correction, every movement of the Empire's fleet flowed through this. Multiple nodes detected," an analyst said, voice tight with awe and fear. "If that's their coordination system, then we don't need to destroy all of it," Ilara finished. "Just enough." The strike team didn't slow. They split. 12 ships, each targeting a different node, approaching from unpredictable angles, using every chaotic maneuver humanity had developed over the course of the war. For a moment, it worked. The structures didn't react immediately. No distortions, no erasure fields. Because this wasn't the battlefield. This was something deeper, something not designed for direct combat. "Targets in range," one of the pilots reported. Ilara held her breath. "Do it." The first wave hit. Not massive explosions, not overwhelming force, but precise, concentrated strikes. Everything those small ships had, delivered at the exact moment of arrival. One node flickered, then dimmed. The effect was instant. Back in the solar system, Empire ships stuttered mid-action. Distortions misfired. Correction sequences overlapped and failed. For a fraction of a second, the Empire lost synchronization, and humanity struck. Across every battlefield, human forces surged forward, exploiting the sudden disruption. Attacks that would have failed moments earlier now slipped through weakened defenses. Ships were hit, damaged, destroyed. Not one, not two, dozens. The impossible was happening. The Empire was losing ground. Illara, a commander said, disbelief in his voice. It's working. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Because the Empire had noticed. Far beyond the strike zone, something shifted. The deep network, the older layer, the one that had awakened, reacted instantly. Core system under attack. Directive override engaged. And then, the response came. Not delayed, not processed, immediate. Back at the network core, the remaining nodes flared with sudden intensity. The space itself twisted, not in the controlled distortion seen before, but violently, unstable. The strike team felt it. Something's wrong. One pilot's voice cut through, sharp with alarm. The first ship vanished. Not erased, not cleanly. It tore apart mid-existence, fragments of matter scattering into nothingness as the space around it collapsed. Evade, evade, another shouted. But there was nowhere to go. This wasn't a system reacting. This was something else, something direct. The Empire had stopped correcting. Now, it was defending. Ships began to fall, one after another. Not instantly, not effortlessly, but inevitably. Illara clenched her fists, her heart pounding as the number of active signals dropped. 12 down to 9, then 8, then 7. Each loss hit harder than the last, because she knew what it meant. They were running out of time. Node 3 is still active, a pilot shouted. We can hit it. Do it. Illara snapped. The remaining ships surged forward, pushing past the collapsing distortions, ignoring everything except the target. One more strike, one more disruption. That was all they needed. The final approach was chaos. Space twisted. Sensors failed. Reality itself seemed unstable. But the ship kept going, straight toward the node. Target locked. The transmission cut. For a heartbeat. Nothing. Then, the node flickered, dimmed, collapsed, and across the battlefield, the Empire faltered again. This time longer. This time deeper. Ships froze mid-action. Distortions failed entirely. Entire sections of the fleet lost coordination, drifting out of formation like something suddenly blind. Illara stared at the data, her breath coming in sharp bursts. They did it. But the cost. She looked at the strike team's status. 2 ships remained. Out of 12. 2. And even those were fading. The final transmission came through, broken and distorted. Worth it. Then, silence. Illara closed her eyes for a brief moment. Not in grief. Not yet. There would be time for that later. Right now, they had an opening. And this time, they couldn't afford to waste it. She turned sharply to the command staff, her voice cutting through the room with renewed intensity. All fleets full assault. No hesitation. No holding back. Hit them everywhere. Don't give them time to recover. Because for the first time since the war began, the Empire wasn't just adapting. It was vulnerable. And humanity was about to bring the fire straight to its throne. The Empire had never burned before. Not truly. Stars had died within its domain. Worlds had been reduced to dust. Entire civilizations had vanished without leaving a trace. But the Empire itself, it had always endured, unbroken, untouched, until now. The moment the second core node collapsed, something fundamental shifted. Not just in the fleet, not just in the battlefield, but in the Empire itself. For the first time in its existence, it felt unstable. Across the vast network that had once functioned with perfect unity, fractures spread. Not complete failures. No, the system was too vast for that, but inconsistencies, delays, conflicts, moments where one part of the Empire no longer agreed with another. And in war, moments were everything. Back in the Sol system, humanity didn't hesitate. They couldn't. Full assault confirmed across all sectors. Alara Voss stood at the center of it all, her voice calm, precise, and unrelenting. Keep the pressure constant. Don't let them stabilize. On the main display, the battlefield had transformed. What had once been a slow, inevitable advance of the Empire was now something else entirely. Chaos. Human fleets surged forward, not in clean formations, but in unpredictable waves, striking from every angle, exploiting every delay, every misalignment, every fracture in the enemy's once perfect system. And, this time, it worked. Empire ships didn't vanish cleanly anymore. Some did, yes, but others flickered, failed, reacted too late. Human attacks slipped through again and again, not just scratching the surface now, but breaking it. One ship collapsed, then another, then 5 more across different sectors. Each loss small in isolation, but together, they added up. They're losing cohesion faster than they can recover, an analyst shouted. Alara nodded, her eyes locked on the shifting data. Because we're not giving them time. That was the key. Relentless pressure. Constant unpredictability. Humanity wasn't stronger. It wasn't more advanced. But it was faster now. Not in speed. In thought. In adaptation. In will. Far beyond the battlefield. Within the Empire's deepest systems, the situation escalated. Core integrity compromised. Network synchronization below acceptable thresholds. Correction efficiency declining. For the first time, the Empire's calculations did not produce a stable outcome. Every projection ended the same way. Uncertainty. And uncertainty was unacceptable. A final directive began to form. Not a correction. Not an adaptation. Something else. Something the Empire had not used in ages. Execute Terminal Purge Protocol. Back in the solar system, Alara felt it before she saw it. A shift. Subtle, but unmistakable. The remaining Empire ships stopped moving. Not retreating. Not advancing. Just still. Her stomach dropped. That's not good. What are they doing? A commander asked. Alara didn't answer immediately. Because the data coming in didn't make sense. Energy readings spiked. Not in weapons, not in distortions, but everywhere. Across every ship. They're not targeting us, she said slowly. They're targeting everything. Realization hit like a shockwave. They're going to wipe the system, someone whispered. Not just Earth. Not just humanity. Everything. A final reset. If the Empire couldn't correct the anomaly, it would erase it completely. Alara, we have to pull back, the commander urged. We can't stop something like that. But Alara didn't move, didn't speak, because, for the first time since the war began, she saw the end, not of humanity, of the Empire. They're overcommitting, she said quietly. What? They're pushing all their systems into one action, she explained, her voice sharpening. Every ship, every node, everything they have focused on a single outcome. Her eyes lit with sudden realization. That means they're vulnerable everywhere else. The room went still. You're saying? I'm saying this is it, Alara cut in. Their final move. Her gaze locked onto the display. So we make ours. There was no time for debate. No time for hesitation. Redirect all forces, she ordered. Target the remaining nodes. Every single one. A commander hesitated. If we do that, we won't be able to stop the purge. Alara met his gaze. We were never going to stop it. Silence. Then, understanding. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about ending the war. Do it. Across the battlefield, human forces shifted instantly. No longer focusing on the ships. No longer trying to defend. Every remaining asset, every ship, every drone, every weapon, turned toward one objective. The network. The source. The heart of the Empire's control. The final assault began. It wasn't coordinated. It wasn't clean. It was everything humanity had become in this war. Chaotic, relentless, unpredictable, and unstoppable. The Empire's purge sequence began to activate. Space trembled. Stars themselves seemed to distort as unimaginable energy built across the fleet. Seconds away, maybe less, human forces hit the first node. It flickered, held, then collapsed. A ripple spread through the system. The purge faltered, not stopped, but delayed. Keep going. Ilara shouted. The second node fell, then the third, each one weakening the Empire's control, destabilizing the very system trying to execute the purge. But time was running out. Energy levels spiked again. Higher, more unstable. This is it, someone yelled. We're out of time. Ilara's voice cut through the chaos. One more. Just one. The final node. The deepest. The most protected. Every remaining human asset converged on it. Not in formation. Not with strategy. But with sheer, overwhelming intent. The Empire reacted. Desperately. Distortions flared wildly, no longer precise, no longer controlled. Ships lashed out with everything they had left, trying to stop the inevitable. But it was too late. Too many angles. Too many variables. Too much chaos. A single human ship broke through. Just one. Damaged. Falling apart. But still moving. Its transmission came through, broken, barely audible. For Earth. Then, impact. The final node shattered. And everything stopped. The energy collapsed. The distortions vanished. The Empire fleet froze in place, as if something fundamental had just been removed. Because it had. The network was gone. The unity, the perfection, the control, all of it, broken. One by one, the Empire ships began to fail. Not explode, not vanish, but drift. Silent, disconnected. For the first time in its existence, the Empire was no longer an empire. It was just pieces. Back on Earth, no one spoke. No one moved. Because no one quite understood what they were seeing. Ilara stared at the display, her breath slow, steady. Is it over? Someone asked. She watched the silent, broken fleet, then nodded. Yes, the war had ended. Not with humanity's destruction, but with an empire burning from within. And in the quiet that followed, something new began. Humanity wasn't alone anymore. Not just because others might exist, but because now they would know. What had once been a warning beacon was gone. What had once been an empire was ashes. And what had once been a mistake had become something else entirely. A beginning. Ilara exhaled softly, her voice barely above a whisper. We survived. But survival wasn't the story. Not anymore. Because humanity had done more than survive. It had changed the balance of the galaxy. Forever. And if you've made it this far into humanity's first interstellar war, don't forget to like, comment, and share this story from HFY Global Tales, because out there, beyond the stars, this was only the beginning.